The day Clara Dutton rode to the Vane spread to offer herself as a bride was the same day she decided, quietly and without ceremony, that she would never be owned. She had made that decision at the kitchen table 3 nights prior, by tallow light, going over her father's ledger, the debt column running long, the asset column reduced to almost nothing, and the bank's letter lying beside the coffee tin like something that had already made up its mind. 90 days. First Territorial Bank of Amarillo was not a patient institution. Neither was the drought that had taken 2/3 of her grass and every head of her father's cattle the spring before he died, leaving Clara with 1,200 acres of Panhandle ground and a number she could not reach. The Vane offer had arrived through a lawyer in a sealed envelope. 600 acres of adjoining range, clear title, no husband. A cattle baron who needed one before year's end to satisfy his father's will. The letter was careful with its language. Clara was not careful in return. She wrote her own version of the contract that same night, revised it twice, and by morning had it folded into her coat pocket beside her father's deed. She rode northwest at first light, the Panhandle opening flat and bruise-grey ahead of her, the sky pulling north and heavy. By the time the Vane windmills came into view, tall iron structures turning slow against the building clouds, the first thunder had moved through the grass below, low and even, not announcing itself so much as clearing its throat. The Vane spread was large, in the way that wealth becomes geography. The main house was 2 stories of dark timber and stone, built square against the wind, with a south-facing porch and windows that looked out over open range. A bunkhouse sat 50 yards east, corrals beyond. A man near the gate was working a bridle with the focused patience of someone who doesn't look up for strangers. He looked up. Clara dismounted and tied her horse without waiting for an invitation. Emmett Vane was in his office when the houseman showed her through. She had expected older. She had expected the meanness to be more visible, the kind that years of power puts on a man's face like weather. What she found was a man in his late 30s, broad through the chest and shoulders, with dark eyes and a jaw that offered nothing. He was standing when she entered. She registered that without assigning meaning to it. "Miss Dutton," he said. "Mr. Vane." She set her version of the contract on his desk between them. "Your lawyer wrote me a letter. I brought one back." He looked at the document. He did not reach for it immediately. "You rode here yourself," he said. "I don't conduct business through intermediaries when the matter is mine to conduct." He came to the desk then, unhurried, and picked up her contract. He read it the way she had read his the first night the lawyer's letter arrived, slowly and twice through, every clause. The storm had been building since she left home, and while he read, the first real lightning cracked the sky beyond the office window, throwing the open range into sharp white light for a half-second before the dark rolled back. He set the paper down. "You changed the land clause," he said. "My land stays in my name. I included that in writing to prevent confusion at a later date. Any other changes?" "Read it through again." He did. The second reading was faster, but no less thorough. When he looked up, something behind his expression had shifted, though the expression itself remained where he had left it. Measured, flat, the face of a man who has learned that showing his calculation is the same as showing his hand. "The rest is as agreed," he said. "The rest is as your lawyer proposed, minus that clause and one addition on page 2. He turned to page 2. She watched him read the paragraph she had added, the one stating plainly that this was a legal and economic partnership, that both parties understood it as such, and that clarity of terms served both parties better than assumption. He was quiet a moment. "You wrote this yourself?" "My father taught me to read a contract before I could read a novel." Something moved across his face. Not amusement exactly, but related to it, and as brief as the lightning outside. He moved to the side of the desk where the ring box sat. She had seen it the moment she entered and had been careful not to look at it directly until now. Dark wood, a plain gold band inside, no stone. "You understand what I need from this arrangement," he said. "I understand what your father's will requires of you. A married heir before year's end, or your brother Holt has legal standing to challenge succession." She held his gaze steady. "What I want to know, Mr. Vane, is whether you can keep your word inside an arrangement that was never built on sentiment." The rain arrived while he was thinking. Hard against the window, the kind of Panhandle rain that comes down like it's owed something. "I have never failed to keep my word," he said. "Ask anyone who's held a contract with me. Ask anyone who's broken one." She considered that, both halves of it. "Then we understand each other." He opened the ring box. She held out her left hand, and he placed the band on her finger with the careful, precise attention of a man keeping himself at a specific distance, close enough to conduct the matter and no closer. His hand was warm through his riding gloves. She noted that the way she noted the weight of the ring itself, directly, without attachment. They both signed. The lightning came again outside, and the Panhandle thunder answered 3 full counts behind it, rolling south across the open grass toward Clara's land. Her land. Still hers, in writing. She stood at the office window after Emmett left the room, watching the storm work its way south, and she let herself feel, for the length of one full breath, the weight of what she had just done. Not regret, not relief. Something between them. The pressure of an irreversible decision made with full knowledge of its cost, which sits in a different place than peace and a different place than grief. She went to bed that night in a room at the end of the hall. The rain was still at the window. The ring caught the lantern light when she set her father's deed on the nightstand beside it. She slept. That was the first surprise of many. The first week passed the way 2 strangers in a large house can pass time, at a careful distance, in separate rooms, maintaining the polite geography of people who have agreed to share a life without agreeing to occupy the same space within it. Emmett rose before first light and was in the saddle before the kitchen fire was properly going. Clara rose at first light and worked the accounting books he had left on the dining table. The ranch ledger, the herd tallies, the winter feed costs. He had not asked her to review them. He had left them where she would see them, and she had not decided whether that was an invitation or a test. She treated it as neither, just work. By the 4th morning, she had found 3 errors in the feed account going back to the previous spring, totaling more than $40 in miscalculation. She corrected them, noted each one on a separate page, and left the note where she had found the ledger. On the 5th morning, the note was gone, and a second ledger appeared beside the first. She worked through it, found 2 more, left another note. She did not see him find it. She wasn't present for whatever happened after. On the 8th day, Clara rode her land boundary. She went east first, following the fence line that marked the edge of the Dutton acreage and the start of the Vane Eastern Range, a long, flat run of Panhandle grass that stretched toward a low escarpment where the caprock broke off and the land dropped in rough steps toward the draw below. The sky was hard blue, the kind of Texas autumn sky that arrives in October like compensation for August. The air carried the dry, mineral smell of caliche dust and sun-cured grass. She smelled it before she saw it. Black powder smoke, and beneath it, the sharp char of burning cedar. She pushed her horse to a canter and came over a low rise to find 3 fence posts on Emmett's eastern boundary, smouldering at their bases, 2 already down, and 40 yards of wire lying slack in the pale grass. Hoofprints in the soft earth, 4 horses, she reckoned from the spread and depth of the marks. They had gone south toward the draw. She sat her horse and read the scene the way her father had taught her. This was not accident. The burn was too clean, too deliberate, aimed at the posts and not the surrounding grass. 2 miles south, where the caprock shelved down into the shadow of the draw, Holt Vane sat his grey horse and watched the thin column of smoke rise against the blue sky with the patience of a man who had decided patience was his primary asset. He was 45 years old, lean where Emmett was broad, with pale eyes and the kind of stillness that in other men might be called quiet, but in him was something more calculated. A watchfulness built over 3 years of waiting for the legal machinery he'd set in motion to deliver what he needed. He had studied the will. He had found the succession clause and turned it in his hands and examined every edge of it. A married heir before year's end. Their father had been thorough in his requirements and careless in his definitions, and carelessness was the kind of gap a patient man could widen with the right instruments. He had already sent the letter to Amarillo. He turned his horse into the draw and rode at an easy walk and did not look back at the smoke. Clara returned to the main house at a hard canter and found Emmett at the corrals. She told him what she'd found: the posts, the wire, the burn pattern, the direction the hoofprints ran. She told him the count of horses. He listened without a word. When she finished, he looked south, though the draw was too far to see from here. His jaw was set in the way she had come to recognize. Not anger exactly, but the face of a man absorbing a calculation and deciding what to do with it. "That's the third incident on the Eastern Line in 6 weeks," he said. "You didn't mention it." "It wasn't your concern at the time." She held his gaze. "It is now." He acknowledged that without words, a stillness that was its own answer. He turned toward the barn and she fell into step beside him because the conversation had not ended. He told her about Holt as they walked. Not all of it, but enough. The will, the succession clause, the quiet campaign Holt had been running through land agents and county clerks, generating paperwork designed to cloud the ranch's operations in small, aggravating ways. A disputed survey here, a questioned fence boundary there. Nothing that would hold up in territorial court alone, but enough friction to make the Vane spread look unstable to any judge who didn't know the land. "He'll move before year's end," Clara said. "That's my reading. He'll need something with legal weight, not fence posts." Emmett looked at her. Yes. They had reached the windmill at the north water tank by then. The tall iron structure turning in the dry afternoon wind, the tank half full below it, the cattle track worn deep in the pale caliche. Emmett stopped there the way a man stops somewhere he has stood 100 times without thinking about why. The wind moved through the grass and the windmill turned, and the blue jays in the timber along the North Creek had gone quiet the way they do when the air has settled again. "My father drove that casing in 1861, Emmett said. "First thing he built when he filed on this range. Said the land was only as good as its water." Clara looked at the iron structure turning above the tank. "He wasn't wrong." "No," Emmett said, "he wasn't." They stood there a moment longer than the conversation required, in the warm, flat light of an October afternoon, and neither of them moved to fill the silence with something it didn't need. "You corrected the feed ledger," he said. 5 errors, going back to April. I left notes." "Were they wrong?" "No," he said. "They weren't wrong." That was all. They walked back toward the house, and the distance between them on the path was not quite what it had been going out. That evening, after supper, Clara found a third ledger on the dining table. Beneath it, a note in Emmett's hand. Brief, no preamble. "Start from January. Tell me what you find." She pulled the chair out, set her coffee down, and started from January. Holt Vane arrived on a Tuesday, 11 days before year's end. He came with two men, a ranch hand and a slim figure in a town coat carrying a leather satchel, who introduced himself as Mr. Aldridge from the Territorial Land Office in Amarillo. Clara saw them from the upstairs window while working through the January accounts. She recognized the grey horse before she recognized the rider. She was downstairs before they reached the porch. Emmett met them at the door. His face gave away nothing, which told Clara precisely what this visit cost him to receive. They went into the office. Holt was polite, unhurried. He sat across the desk from his brother, set his hat on one knee, and spoke in the measured tones of a man performing a courtesy rather than drawing a weapon. He used the word routine twice. Aldridge opened his satchel and produced a document, a certified copy of a Territorial Land Office record, dated 1869, claiming that the original transfer of the Dutton acreage from federal range to private homestead had been irregularly filed and never formally ratified in Amarillo. The title was, Aldridge chose his word with care, clouded. Clouded title meant a clouded marriage. A clouded marriage meant the succession clause could not be satisfied. It meant year's end was immaterial, and Holt had until the territorial court convened in spring to press his challenge at leisure. Emmett's hands were flat on the desk. Still, Clara stood at the edge of the room and said nothing, and watched the two brothers in the way you watch a situation you have already prepared for. Holt let the silence sit. Then he turned to Clara with the practiced warmth of a man who wants to seem generous while he tightens a knot. Mrs. Vane, this is a legal matter, not personal. The title question doesn't touch you directly. The title question is my land, Clara said. Holt smiled, careful at the edges, that smile. Yes, well, that's precisely… Mr. Aldridge. Clara looked past Holt to the land agent. What is the filing number on that document? Aldridge blinked. He consulted the document. He read the number. Clara walked to the desk, opened the second drawer on the left. She had catalogued the office records on her third day in the house and produced a leather folder. From it she took two documents and placed them side by side on the desktop, where every man in the room could see them. The first was her father's original homestead filing. Federal stamps, 1868. Every line properly executed, the territorial agent's signature clear at the bottom, the ink as dark as the day it dried. The second was a letter from the Territorial Land Office in Amarillo, dated 6 weeks prior, confirming that the Dutton homestead filing had been reviewed upon specific request, found to be in full compliance with the 1862 Homestead Act, and formally ratified as clear title. The office seal, the senior agent's signature, the filing number matching her father's document exactly. 6 weeks prior. 3 days before she had ridden to the Vane spread with her own version of the contract in her coat pocket. She had gone to Amarillo first. She had stood at the land office counter and asked the question before she made the ride northwest, gotten the letter, filed it with the deed, and said nothing to anyone. Not because she distrusted Emmett Vane, but because her father had taught her that in any negotiation, what you know and what you show are two different instruments, and you keep them separate until the moment calls for both at once. This was that moment. The room was very quiet. Aldridge looked at the letter. He looked at the original filing. His mouth worked briefly without producing language. Holt Vane was not looking at the documents. He was looking at Clara. The practiced smile was still arranged on his face, but it had stopped meaning anything. The expression of a man whose play has been called before he finished making it, wearing composure in weather it was never designed for. "I'd like to keep your certified copy," Clara said to Aldridge. "For the ranch's records. You're welcome to return to Amarillo with confirmation that the title is clear." Aldridge looked at Holt. Holt looked at the window. "I believe," Holt said after a long moment, "that there may have been an error in the audit." "There was," Clara said. "I'm glad we could clear it up." They left. Aldridge first, the ranch hand after, Holt last, mounting his grey horse without looking back, riding south toward the draw at his own pace, the deliberate unhurriedness of a man who is lost but won't let it look that way. Clara stood on the porch and watched until the grey horse was a dark shape against the pale grass, and then nothing at all. Emmett came to stand beside her. The afternoon light was coming in flat and low, turning the grass the colour of old copper, and to the northwest the horizon was dark and stacked. Another storm moving with the particular purpose of a panhandle front, which does not announce itself and does not wait. "You went to Amarillo before you came here," Emmett said. It was not a question. "I verified the title before I put it on the table. That seemed like basic practice." He was quiet. She could feel him looking at her without turning to confirm it. "The deal we made," he said. "Yes." "You came into it with more than the contract covered." "So did you," she said. "You stood up when I walked into the room. You read every line I wrote before you said a word. You left the ledgers out without asking." She let that sit a moment. None of that was in the contract either. The wind moved through the yard and lifted dust from the corral, carrying it south. The windmill was turning at the edge of the tank, and the storm was coming down out of the northwest, the way they always came. Steady, without apology, belonging to no one. They stood there on the porch. The distance between them was not what it had been the morning she arrived, when two strangers had signed their names beside each other on a document built for practical reasons. It had been changing for a while, not by announcement, but by accumulation. Ledger correction by ledger correction, fence line to windmill to kitchen table, in the quiet, unremarkable acts of two people choosing honesty inside an arrangement that was never supposed to require it. The deal they had made was still the deal they had made. But there is a thing that sometimes happens between two people who come to a hard table and refuse to flinch. A thing that doesn't have a clause in any contract and doesn't need one to hold. The storm came in off the northwest. They stayed on the porch and watched it come. Some bargains are made for survival and become something else entirely. The Panhandle keeps no record of what passed between two people on that porch in the last autumn light of 1877, but the Vane ranch ran for another 40 years, and the name on the eastern land deed never changed. If these stories find you, the ones that happened too quietly for the history books, subscribe and stay. There are more of them, and they are worth your time.